Welcome to episode 2 of the Tonewood Podcast. I'm Matthew.
Hey, and I'm Jake, and today we're talking Parker guitars. Matthew, my understanding is you've got a Parker guitar story that you've just been itching to tell people.
It kind of seems like anybody that has owned a Parker guitar ends up with a Parker guitar story.
Don't we all? Yeah, I know it.
Yeah. It's funny how that goes around.
Oh.
I think it was... How long ago was that now? 3 months ago, I guess. Maybe even a little bit longer. I had, as usual, looking around on Reverb, bored one evening, and have for years have always looked at Parker guitars in passing, more from the perspective of just seeing what the market is for them.
Mm-hmm.
Just because it's, of course, not a guitar that you often hear anything about. And somebody on Reverb ended up having a fairly good condition Parker guitar, the Nitefly version of it, which was their Strat copy.
Uh-huh.
I guess if you want to call it that. And it was the colorway that I always liked with the I guess you would call it the polar white, Arctic white.
Sure.
With the pearloid pickguard.
Mm-hmm.
For a surprisingly good price. He'd ended up, I think, having it up there for $1,500.
That's not bad.
I think I put in a bid for maybe $1,300, give or take, and he took it.
Sure.
And I didn't expect him to take it, just because I thought that, well, that's kind of a lowball offer, all things considered, especially with respect to the condition that the guitar was in.
Sure.
So I was a little surprised that he took it, and somewhat disappointed that he took it, just because he would. In the end, he would have done me a favor if he just told me. She's like, nah, that's a little too low.
Uh-oh.
But I ended up getting the guitar. He was a great seller. He shipped it out fast. It was packed well, so I wasn't concerned with respect to just whether or not the condition that it showed in the photos was going to be what it was going to be when I got it. And so I was thankful that it came in the same condition that he reported it in, which was good. But
it's always nice when that happens.
Yeah, that kind of began the interesting 3-month journey of my Parker guitar ownership. It was fun for a while, but it quickly became
Ooh.
It quickly became a pain. I guess I'm trying to think of where a good place to start would be, I guess. I suppose for any Parker guitar enthusiasts out there, many of them are probably well aware of what it is that you're sort of getting yourself into when you're looking at Parker guitars, especially just with respect to the fact that, they are considered vintage at this point.
Sure, they're old. I
think this one was a 2002, if I'm not mistaken, 2001.
Okay. Pre-refined, as we'll define later.
Yeah. And so, yeah, it was like any, I guess, quote unquote vintage guitar. There's some things that a person kind of has to keep in mind about vintage guitars in general, but Parker guitars have an interesting take on that, I think, a little bit, especially with respect to just how they were made.
Yeah.
Which I know is something that we can talk about, but I guess rather than getting into all of the specifics right now of just what it is about Parker guitars that require a little bit of homework, in my case, I will point out something that I would say is largely not talked about much with Parker guitars. Not from the perspective, it's talked about from perspective of just the design and the stability of them, but I don't often see them talked about in reference to what I experienced with mine, which was the bridge.
Yeah.
And the design of that bridge.
It's very unique.
in reference to just what happens if you have a problem.
Sure. Well, because it's interesting there, because like Parker guitars, you're right. Like vintage guitars are kind of a whole, they're a whole thing in and of themselves that you're getting into. It's not like you can walk down in a lot of cases and just buy like a reproduction part of exactly what's on the guitar. Like usually you're having to buy either a modern version of something that's on the guitar anyway that you're quote unquote upgrading to, and hopefully keeping the original parts so you can keep it,
Yeah.
original without modifying it. But with Parker guitars, the it's kind of a whole different animal because a lot of the parts on that guitar are proprietary to that guitar. So It's not like you can run out and put whatever other tremolo on there. It's really the Parker tremolo that you're looking for if you have a problem, and those are about as rare as hen's teeth,
Yeah, I mean, that was the one thing that, I mean, I knew, I was aware of some of the idiosyncrasies with Parker guitars, just having followed him for years. I mean, even, I first saw Parker guitars back in the back in the days when I used to get guitar magazines back in the late 90s, early 2000s. I mean, it was, even back then, it was a unique, an especially unique guitar then. I mean, I think in some cases even remains today.
Oh yeah,
to be pretty unique.
I think so.
And so, if anybody that's followed Parker, like I said, you sort of are aware of just the of what to kind of keep in mind if you plan on buying one.
Right.
They're
quirky.
They're quirky.
They're quirky.
So you got the typical things to consider, which is the carbon fiber neck. There's always been talk of delamination on the carbon fiber neck on used ones, which the more you read up about them, it does seem like that was a pretty small,
but vocal
minority
of customers
that made that a pretty big deal.
Like a huge deal.
Even, I mean, included in that were the I guess you could say as well, like the delamination of the stainless steel frets.
Sure. Because the frets weren't set like regular frets. They were epoxied into place. Because what I believe they did was I don't know if they ordered the fret wire custom or if they ground off the tang of the fret when they installed it. But I believe what they did is, either way, got just the fret top, the crown, if you will. And in most cases, I believe they epoxied it onto the carbon fiber exoskeleton of the neck. Because the neck was, some type of tone wood, if you will, and
correct. Yeah,
wrapped in carbon fiber, and then they epoxied the frets onto that. So there's an interesting video. I don't know if you stumbled upon it at any point in your Parker research, but there's a video of Ken Parker in the factory removing a fret off of the carbon fiber fingerboard and demonstrating.
I did see that. Yeah,
demonstrating how to epoxy it back into place. Because I think like you, the one thing that I stumbled across in my research before I got into a Parker guitar was a Parker is a guitar where you have to read the manual before you do anything.
100%.
You have to read the manual.
that is one thing that was a first for me, is that when I got this Parker, that I had to read the manual.
Yeah.
I've never experienced a guitar like that before.
Right? Because intuitively it looks like a guitar and it functions sort of like a guitar, but, a lot of it's a quirky guitar, Ken really pushed the envelope in terms of trying to innovate what he legitimately believed was a better product in every way. And,
he wasn't wrong. I guess instead of beating around the bush, I guess I might as well just explain it. That bridge is, I would say even today, still a unique take on a floating bridge. Just because I don't know if anybody has ever taken apart a Parker bridge before, But when you take the whole assembly out of the guitar, it's a deceptively simple design.
Sure.
I mean, when you look at, I mean, obviously, if you're comparing it to a standard trem on a Fender Strat, I mean, obviously the Fender Strat trem is, I mean, it's hard to get much more simpler than that. But when you're looking at the Parker Bridge with respect to what it can do, that it's a clever design.
Sure.
And I mean, I won't try to explain how the bridge is designed, just because, I mean, that's something, that's a visual that you just have to see. So for anybody that's listening, that's curious what a Parker Bridge design is, I would recommend just go Google it, just because it sort of puts in context the issue that ended up becoming my problem.
Sure.
When I got it, is that the guitar was great for, I mean, it has been by far, in my opinion, the best Strat I've ever played.
Nice.
I mean, no comparison, just because of, I mean, it fit well. The frets were almost perfect. There was one small caveat to that. There was one very minor high fret.
Okay.
But I mean, for the most part, it didn't really affect.
Yeah. High's better than low.
The way it played. Yeah, I was going to say, I would definitely
You can
prefer
fix
it
high
to low.
pretty easy. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it was just the pickups in them were great. The tone controls, the fact that those tone controls were still 20 some years old felt still brand new.
Yeah.
I mean, the Spurzl locking tuners still function like new.
Sure.
But to finally get to it, that the one thing about the bridge that I don't know about you and yours, because I know that you have a Parker still.
I do.
That the one thing that was very rarely talked about was what happens if you end up having a problem with the bridge.
Mm-hmm.
And in my case, the bridge posts rest on ball bearings that pivot. So that's what gives the floating tremolo the ability to float, essentially.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
And in those posts are threads.
Mm-hmm.
And the way it is sort of an ingenious design in a way is the way that Parker designed the bridge is that the action of the bridge is adjusted by 2 set screws.
Sure.
From the back of the guitar that are just adjusted via Allen wrenches. And so there's there's some travel in those set screws that allow you to raise and lower the bridge. But in my case, the one post that had the threads for the set screw, the threads ended up getting stripped out.
Oh, no. User error, or was it a byproduct of at some point over the 20 years, you know?
I think it was sort of all of the above, because I did not realize, and this is actually something that's not brought up in the manual very well either. Mm-hmm. But again, I mean, I think this is something that you just don't know until you have it happen.
Yeah.
Is that I didn't realize, I mean, it sounds dumb talking about it now, but at the time I didn't think about it in reference to just how the bridge works, is that those set screws can only go so far.
Yeah, it's true.
And the other thing is that, and this is where the user error comes in, where I think it was a combination of just my not understanding the bridge, in addition to, my guess is that this had probably happened at some point in the past, mm-hmm. where it weakened the threads a little bit. But if you don't adjust those set screws the same,
yeah,
then the set screws can get binded up in the posts.
Yeah.
And so if you happen to adjust one side of the bridge more than the other, mm-hmm. the set screw is, and in my case, the set screw, that binding ended up crushing the threads in the post.
Yeah.
And at that point, I ended up having this bridge that just it couldn't use it.
Yeah.
Couldn't adjust the height of the bridge to get it set in place.
Mm-hmm.
So anyways, that sort of ended up this snowball of just trying to understand how this bridge works.
Yeah.
And realizing that one, evidently I have a case of dumb brain and not putting necessarily two and two together until it was sort of too late. That was just like, oh yeah, I mean, if you end up sort of adjusting the bridge in a way that one side is a bit higher than the other, you have it's very easy to get those set screws binding in those threads.
Yeah.
And like I said, in my case, the threads ended up sort of collapsing in the post.
Right.
Which meant that there was one of two things, right? It's like, well, I mean, either you just call it a day, and it's just like, well, that was fun.
Right.
And then
too bad.
Try to sell it for parts. Or you end up getting the threads retapped.
Yeah.
So that's what I ended up doing, was being able to get the threads retapped on it. And it actually ended up that the retapped threads were actually better than what they were, of course, just because,
sure.
I mean,
freshen those up.
The guitar.
Yeah.
But anyways, that it was. So now I'll put that part of it aside, and then now I have this bridge that's been repaired. The set screw is doing what it's supposed to be doing outside of the body of the guitar. But now I'm confronted with, well, how do I put this bridge back together?
Sure. Which
sounds stupid because when you're looking at it, it's two posts that sit in a collar that are inset in the body of the guitar. So sure. It's just like, oh, well, the bridge just sinks down into these posts. And then you just start adjusting the set screws to at the height that you need them to be.
Mm-hmm.
Well, another case of probably just a dumb brain, and then at the same time just not really seeing it at the time, is just that, well, if you have these set screws, then at what point, or rather, let me back up a minute, that you have these set screws in that now can be threaded into these binding posts, which are then supposed to raise and lower the bridge. But the thing is, it's just like, where do the set screws need to be placed?
Right.
In reference to the bridge
mm-hmm.
and the body, sort of like a baseline.
Sure.
Of this is where the set screws need to be.
Right. And
then once the set screws are in that position, then you can then get the bridge to, I think, what the Parker manual calls the home position.
Sure.
And I want to tell you something. I mean, to anybody else, this might seem like common sense, but that, more than anything in that whole ordeal, that was one of the harder pieces of information to come by.
Sure. And it's tough too, because, Parker has not functionally existed in almost 10 years. So you can't call, there's no Parker Guitars helpline that you can call. What you do have, and which actually is a really great resource for anybody who is looking to get into a Parker, is the Fly Clone Project, which is a forum where I think even Ken Parker posts sometimes, although not too crazy much. But it's a community of Parker enthusiasts that try to maintain a repository of, because it's hard to find all the information that they can get together. The user documentation is there. There's different like workarounds for a lot of the common issues, because that's not Matthew's issue is not a unique issue in Parker guitars. Like a lot of the earlier Flies had, this kind of flex cable push-in PCB wiring. And over the years, some of those Flies are getting to be right at around 30 years old, because I think they came out in 93, if memory serves correctly. So
something like that. That sounds
something
about right.
like that. So, if you have a bad pot or a scratchy pot, it's on this like flex cable connector that goes into a PCB board that you need to now either, replace or do something with. So, the guys over at FlyClone have done an amazing job, like just reverse engineering all of the the different electronic circuitry, the different like components, what you can kind of get to work if you want to swap some parts out. Like it's really pretty amazing.
I mean that FlyClone project is an indispensable resource for anybody that owns a Parker guitar, just because it was actually because of the FlyClone project that I was finally able to find somebody that answered the question that I had.
Yeah, like a similar issue.
Yeah, a similar issue, but in a way that still made it hard to search for.
Sure.
Just because, I mean, I'd spent a ton of time on the FlyClone project trying to find other users that had a similar question. It's just like, how do you set a baseline for the set screws in the bridge?
Mm-hmm.
And in my case, it was, I came across the answer by not looking for that answer. It ended up being for something entirely different. And somebody in one of the comments had said that they too had a similar problem of just not understanding how the set screws are supposed to be baselined in the bridge.
Sure. To get it to that home kind of.
Yeah, that home position. It's just like, do you screw the set screws all the way in until they bottom out? Or, do the set screws go into the bridge first, or do they go into the body first?
Sure.
And it turns out, which now looking back on it, I mean, it does make a little bit of sense, but again, it's just not one of those things I think is intuitive enough, is that if you're somebody that has a Parker bridge that's been removed, that in order to get it back into what, again, they call the home position, the set screws only need to be screwed in until it has enough purchase to stay in place.
Sure.
So rather than screwing the set screw into the posts of the bridge, you just turn the set screw enough until you can feel that the threads have grabbed on.
Sure, kind of caught.
And then you leave it alone.
Sure. Well, and yeah, that's the interesting thing though, is like the cool thing about the Parkers and what a lot of the Parker advocates will readily mention is that the beauty of that guitar is the quality of the materials used, especially in the pre-refined Parkers. Not that there are, that many issues post-refinement with the refined guitars, but especially earlier on, the quality of the materials and the construction of the guitar make it stable enough to the point to where if you get it set up, provided you don't change tunings or string gauges a bunch, you can kind of, generally speaking, leave it where it is, and it'll catch. It's actually funny because I had an issue. I play the lightest string that I'll play is a 10 because I pop 9s way too easily. They break all the time on me. So when I got my Fly, whoever had owned it, well, probably realistically speaking, the few owners before me, had kept 9s on the guitar. And so, I was looking at it and ended up putting 10s on it. Yeah. The funny thing was that the neck was just a little bit too bendy. Like you needed to adjust the truss rod a little bit to get, to kind of flatten the neck out a little bit. Just to account for the higher string tension and the pressure. So I was looking online really carefully because I had, like I mentioned, before I bought the guitar, I was reading up and everybody was like, read the manual. So I was like, okay, well, the manual is not that hard to find, but it can be a little tricky because there's like a couple of different manuals based on that, Yeah, I think it was around 2003 that Ken Parker actually sold Parker guitars, and that was where the quote unquote refined era happened because the company that bought Parker guitars, I think it was US Music, ended up making some changes to not the design of the guitar, but some changes in components and, kind of moving some stuff around. And they moved, manufacturing out of Massachusetts where they were being manufactured up until 2003 to, I think it was Illinois.
Illinois, yeah.
And the interesting thing about that is, so you've got to find the right manual, and then when you read that manual, one of the first things that you can see is that the truss rod's also not a normal truss rod. It's basically a big hunk of piano wire. That's threaded in the neck that you increase the tension on in order to, kind of increase the bow of the neck so you can kind of release it. And I'll be the first to admit that I don't understand it 100% fully, but I understood it enough to adjust it one time.
That was it's funny you mentioned that, just because like that is the most nervous I have ever been.
Yeah.
In adjusting a tremolo is knowing that the fact that it is a fancy piece of piano wire in a way that if you break it, it's over.
That's it. You're done.
That's it.
No more truss rod,
You might as well start a fire with whatever you got left over because it's like
neck's done. There's no fixing it. Like
you're not fixing that. And,
that's the end of the road.
And so that was the thing that was pretty evident with the one that I had, and it sort of speaks to that comment that I think Ken Parker has said in the past, is that at the time they were building a $10,000 guitar for $3,000.
Yeah, absolutely.
And when the thing about the one that I had, those Niteflies, they, with respect to the other models that had the piezo system and the even more complicated tremolo on the fly adjustment tremolo system that they made. Even on the Nitefly that I had, which is a very simple guitar in the way that it was designed, that component wise, there was really nothing in that guitar that, like you were saying earlier, that if you have it set to where you want it, you have your string gauges set and you're going to leave it there, then there's really nothing to worry about.
That's right. That's all you need. It's a super stable guitar,
And the experience that I had with mine is just it was one of those, I guess, moments, is just that obviously this was not my first vintage guitar that I bought this year that didn't pan out. But
oh no.
It was one of those years apparently, but but it was one of those examples of just the fact that the guitar, I was able to get the guitar back in working order and set, and it was perfectly fine. That floating tremolo system is really cool. Especially it's the little details for me that it's hard to kind of not fanboy out a little bit with Parker guitars. I'm a bit biased just because I've always liked them, but having one that, and it's something that I've often wondered, it's like, I wonder why others don't. Maybe they do, and I just haven't paid that much attention, but the fact that the bridge is floating, that if you want to have a blocked bridge, it's just another set screw,
right?
That you turn until it hits the bottom of the bridge,
right? That locks it up,
and that's it.
Yeah.
And so if you're wanting to change strings on a floating tremolo, like on these Niteflies, all you have to do is just turn that set screw to where it bottoms out at the bottom of the bridge. The bridge isn't going to move. You change your strings, and then you back the set screw out, and then it's back to the floating.
You're back set up.
It's really smart.
Clever, yeah.
It's pretty clever. the kind of the sad part about it is, I guess, is just after that episode, getting it back into working order. I wouldn't say that it necessarily took the shine off of. I don't think it took the shine off the Parker guitar per se. I think it was just more of a reminder of what happens when you get into a rather vintage guitar. That not only a vintage guitar, but a guitar like a Parker that's pretty unique in the first place.
It's all proprietary parts. Yeah.
And so I guess to kind of sum up that story, I ended up just selling it locally just
Sure.
because, I mean, and not to say that a guy was going to encounter similar issues down the road, but knowing that could be a possibility if a person wasn't careful, that
Sure.
you could end up with these threads on the post causing some issues. It's just like, I don't think I don't think I want to revisit that again.
Right.
And so, sold it to somebody locally who was happy to have it. I mean,
Right.
I actually do. I do wish I had it back.
Yeah.
But then on the other hand, I'm just reminded of just basically that story I told. It's just
Right. Scared.
proprietary parts.
It's a scary thing, like when it goes wrong on you, you're on your own, and that's a tough spot to be in. It's great when the guitar works, but like the second the guitar doesn't work, that's any guitar, not just Parker, but I mean, you name it.
Yeah.
I mean, if your Squire Telecaster doesn't work, that's an annoying place to be, especially if you're like unsure of how to fix it, or like, even worse, if your Squire Telecaster had a bridge you couldn't replace, that you can't source parts for anymore. I mean, it's a scary thing. You're basically talking, you gotta look into custom refabricating some of the parts, or finding a good example of one that, was taken out of a different guitar for parts or what have you. So, it's a lot more work than just stringing it up and playing it some days, like it's a tough spot.
I mean, the other thing about that is just, I mean, I think it is another one of those examples of just maybe a vocal minority, but it is actually one thing I could see happening, is the fact that, I mean, that's another thing about those Parker bridges, is the saddles are pretty unique with the ball bearing.
Yeah.
The ball bearings in them. And so, I mean, there's plenty of info on the Flyclone project about people that have had ball bearings that have just popped out.
Sure.
And thankfully, because of that, the resource of the Flyclone project, I mean, you can get replacement ball bearings for them.
Sure.
But again, this just sort of goes back to the whole proprietary nature of everything, just because, like you were saying, anything can go wrong with the guitar, but like the beauty of a Telecaster is just, it's the Toyota Corolla of guitars in a way.
Yeah. You can always find another one,
You can always get parts, and for whatever reason, if I don't know why that would ever be the case, but if there was a part that didn't fit right for whatever reason, you could make it fit.
Sure. Yeah, definitely.
If you wanted to, But,
and to some extent, I mean, yeah, it's possible, if you really get into the weeds of modding, it's possible to generally retrofit anything onto whatever. But, for some of the instruments, like, it really, like, you would hate to like seal up a Parker like bridge cavity and put a hip shot bridge on it or something, because that really wasn't the idea behind the,
yeah,
you could do it if you really wanted, but I don't think you'd have.
Yeah, and I've seen people that have done that too, where they've just retrofitted,
like other parts or
just a more of a, I guess, contemporary bridge on them. But it's just, that takes away from the beauty of the Parker.
Yeah, not quite as.
I mean, I know that you have one still.
I do still have one. Yeah, I have a Nitefly as well. I bought it at around it was around the same time you did, because it was kind of the same thing. I remember first seeing them in the Sweetwater catalogs in the early 2000s, maybe as early as the late 90s, but I think it was the early 2000s. And I always thought the Parkers were just the coolest guitars. And I still do. I have a hankering for an emerald green Parker Fly that
Yeah, those are good lookers.
I still want one. I haven't bought one, and I don't know that I'm going to, but I do still think that's probably the coolest one, in my opinion. But the Nitefly that I have is the Sunburst model with the pick guard, and I do have the piezo, the Fishman preamp in mine. And it's
Yeah,
a
that
cool
was one thing
guitar.
that mine that was the one difference on mine. It didn't have the piezo system in it.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because like I feel like a lot of the ones that you find used do have that, but they definitely made them with and without.
Yeah.
The piezo system. I mean, you can look at it as it's just another thing to break, but it actually is pretty cool. I when I bought mine, it didn't come with the original cable, because I think when you bought one new, Parker shipped you like a stereo Y cable that you could use to take advantage of the different signal options out of the output jack. But
Yeah.
I ended up building a little TRS to dual TS mono breaker box in a enclosure, and was able to get pedal boards set up where you could have like acoustic effects on one side of the signal chain and electric guitar effects on the other, and you could get some pretty cool sounds out of that. That was really neat. But it's the same sort of thing. I do still have mine. I haven't sold it, but the thing that turned me off initially from buying it was that I was scared of being kind of, up the creek without a paddle, and not having, any kind
Yeah.
of life preserver to rescue me if, you did have a problem, just because, I feel like some days are frustrating enough. And when I sit down to play the guitar, I want that to be as unfrustrating as possible.
Yep. Yeah,
And,
exactly.
then some other days I'm looking for a project. So, you kind of have a couple of beers and hop on Reverb and see what happens. And sometimes you end up with a Parker Nitefly that you had sworn off buying just because the deal was right, and you're feeling good about it, and
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what makes Parker guitars a bit tempting, is the fact that considering how expensive they were back in the day and the quality in which they were built,
yeah,
that you can still get actually really great deals on them.
sure.
On
And they're really
Reverb.
great guitars. I really do think so.
Uh,
They're really great guitars for that money.
I mean, yeah, I mean, I still, I still see Niteflies occasionally on there for, roughly around the same price I paid for mine, $1,300, $1,600, depending on condition. And really, I mean, that's a great deal. I mean, even at sort of full asking price that people are typically averaging them out to be,
Mm-hmm.
that is an incredible guitar for that kind of money.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
it can't be beat, in my opinion.
I really don't think so. I mean, if you're willing to take the risk on it, and it's really not that much risk. You just need to, generally speaking, so long as you buy an example that's in working order, which if you do so on Reverb, you can, most of the time you get purchase protection with that. So you can, if it shows
Yeah.
up busted, most of the time they'll help you out. But if you get one that's in good shape, generally speaking, so long as you're very careful with it, like you can have a guitar that will remain in really good shape. I mean, for pretty much ever. I mean, nothing's forever, but Parker's built pretty close to withstanding the test of time, so.
Yeah, I mean, that was, like I was saying a little bit earlier, that was the thing that was a little surprising to me, actually. I mean, it's like I've obviously played a lot of guitars over the years, and I mean, I know it sounds like, I guess I'm biased, but it's just, if you play enough guitars over the years, you do start to notice the little things that kind of add up. And that was how I felt about the Parker. I mean, it seems kind of weird to mention, I guess, but the Parker that I bought, I think, had been through several owners
Mm-hmm.
since it was originally bought.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if this is the case on yours, but on mine, the tone pots still were perfect.
Everything was. I had my tone pot was not perfect. I did have a scratchy one, which
Did
I
you?
yeah, I couldn't quite, deoxit my way out of it still being scratchy. There was
Gotcha.
it was a little scratchy in the there was a little bit of a gap where I think probably just something on the wiper either was corroded past the point of being able to be cleaned, or
Yeah, that makes
I
sense.
ended up just replacing it. But when I did replace it, I put in a push pull pot that allowed me to add my neck pickup onto the other positions of the switch, because it's a humbucker single coil guitar, so it's set up like a
Yeah.
regular, like a deluxe Strat or something with a humbucker in the bridge. And
Yep.
so adding in that push pull pot, I was able to do the 7 sound mod, like like on Gilmore Strats or whatever, that you can add in that neck
That's a
pickup.
nice
So
that's a nice setup.
yeah, I mean, it was worth it because I don't know, I do actually use that a lot. I have a lot of my Strats modded that same way. And you can get some cool sounds with the neck pickup and the bridge pickup on Strat style guitars if you have the mod installed. But outside of that, on that Parker, pretty much everything was ready to go. Given that, even despite the fact that it was, I don't know if mine's all the way to the 2000s. I think it's a late 90s one. It's like a 97 or a
Oh, okay.
98. I'd have to
Yeah.
check the serial. I don't remember. Um, but it is a really cool guitar. I guess the only other problem with it was uh, the pick guard on it had cracked from the uh, edge of the pickup cavity all the way to pretty much the screw on that horn of the pick guard that was holding it in place.
Oh, sure.
So because the top on my Nitefly, at least, I don't know if they're all like this because I don't have a lot of experience with them, but the top on mine is a little bit arched. So that crack was actually protruding off of the off the pick guard, and you could kind of catch your thumb on it if you weren't careful while you were picking or whatever. So
Yeah, mine also had that slight radius
yeah,
to
right
it.
on. So I don't know if all the USA Parkers are like that. I would assume so. But I just don't have enough experience to say. But yeah, so
Yeah, same.
the the pick guard itself was a little bit of an issue. So I was able to find somebody who could manufacture a new one. So I put this. I don't know if anybody else has a tortoise shell pick guard on their Sunburst Parker Fly, but mine looks pretty retro vintagey, given that it's got this really weird kind of body shape and very futuristic vibe, but it's got the tortoiseshell pickguard, the Strat pickups. It's
That looks
pretty
good.
funny. Yeah, it's pretty funny. So so I did. But I did keep the original parts. So if I do ever end up kind of moving it along its way, the whoever the new owner of it is will be able to opt to just put the other stuff back in, or I may even do that for them before I sell it if they want. But
Yeah.
generally speaking, it's one that I bought before I heard, and frankly, before you had all of the issues with yours. And then once you did have the issues with yours, I don't think I've ever been more frightened about a guitar in my collection, where I was like, you get that ticking time bomb feeling almost, a chill runs down your spine. You're like, oh no.
It's just like, oh, if I look at it wrong, is it gonna?
That's right. I mean, it sucks that
Oh,
happened to you, but I really don't want it to happen to me. Like that would be
right.
super unfortunate. So, I mean, thankfully
Yeah.
I got mine for around the same thing that you got yours for, and I still do like it. I do play it. Although it's not a daily, it's like a special occasion guitar for me. It's not one of the daily driver ones. It's pretty much when I pull out when I want that stereo, kind of acoustic electric thing, or when I
Yeah.
want the kind of nifty fly tones you can get out of it. It's a cool guitar to play.
Yeah. I mean, it's yeah. Like I was saying earlier. I mean, this looking back on it now. I mean, I could. I guess if I had to do it over again, I don't. I probably should have kept it around just because that polar white with the perloid pickguard is not a color that you see very often. I mean,
Yeah,
they do come up on reverb occasionally, and the ones that do show up are in significantly worse condition than the one that I had.
sure.
So it's doubtful that I'm ever going to buy another one.
Hmm.
again. I mean, if I did, it would have to be under the right circumstances
Right.
to kind of consider that. But I mean, the one thing that I actually did, I mean, I know there was a lot of debate on that, even among Parker owners, was those DiMarzio pickups
Hmm.
that Parker put in those Niteflies. I know that some people weren't big fans of them, and I think that was a pretty common thing. Is that, I mean, at least the ones that I've seen on Reverb occasionally, where sometimes they don't have the original pickups in them.
Yeah,
But
sure.
the one that I the one that I bought had the original DiMarzio pickups in them, and I actually really like them.
Yeah.
They were it was a set that I actually wish I had in my own Strats. Um,
Sure, they are really nice pickups. I'm attracted to the ones in my guitar as well. I think they do sound good. I know that a lot of Parker owners, especially on the Fly Clone project, talk about how, a lot of people back in the day did try to swap pickups, for whatever their favorite pickup was, but they're the first to tell you that, a lot of the times those pickups aren't going to be, they're not going to sound exactly right because of how the Fly is sort of constructed. Like pickups tend to sound a little bit different in it, and you can get a lot of tones out of the guitar that you have by, like, adjusting the pickup height or changing the strings to a different, set
yeah,
or material or gauge. You can kind of mess around with the tone a little bit that way. um
yep,
but generally speaking, I have no problems with the pickups in mine. I even have other sets of Strat pickups that you could put into there, because I think that's one of the reasons the Nitefly is such an approachable guitar, is that if you do want to get into one with the idea of modding it, I think it's one of the more friendly ones to mod, because the regular
yeah,
Flies
definitely.
had the proprietary, kind of pickup routes and whatnot, depending on which one you bought at what time. But the pickups that came in the guitar, I think that you could definitely tell that a lot of thought was put into selecting the ones for it. And they did sound really good in there. Like, I mean, I think they might not be everybody's cup of tea, as, nothing ever is. But, I think for the most part, if you wanted like a good set of pickups that kind of covered a lot of ground, I think that was a really
Yeah,
good set.
I they had a really, I mean, obviously they had, like, in the neck position. I mean, of course, single coils. I mean, they had that that great single coil sound, obviously. But the one I have other Strats, of course, to compare it against, and that was what I liked about those DiMarzio pickups in the Nightfly, was that not only did they have that. I mean, I don't know if you felt this way about them, but I felt that not only did they have that nice chime,
Hmm.
that nice, yeah, chime of a single coil, but they also had this little bit of aggressiveness to them
Hmm.
that was very pleasant. It wasn't, to my ears anyways, it wasn't very harsh. But especially if you were, they covered a lot of ground between a clean setting and
Hmm.
something that was overdriven.
Yeah.
And it was they were very responsive, I guess, is maybe the better thing to say.
Yeah, definitely. I would share that same experience. Like, it's nothing that you couldn't trim out by adjusting the settings on your amp, or like messing with your volume or tone controls, or yeah, I mean, they're really really cool pickups and a really really cool guitar. And it's kind of a shame that the one that you bought didn't work out exactly how you pictured it. I know that you were like, for a while you were like, I'm never buying, Parker guitars again, because I'm frightened of the consequences of doing that. But now I'm hearing there might be, under the right circumstances, could be a future Parker. You never know. So,
Yeah, I don't think I could ever. I don't think I would necessarily not consider them again. I mean, at the time, obviously, I mean, my feelings on them was clouded a lot by just not being as familiar with the the design of that bridge, despite the fact that the bridge is not that complicated. It's
right.
just, it was, again, one of those examples of just it was the little details that added up,
Mm-hmm.
that there wasn't a lot of information out there on them.
Yeah.
And so I think at the time that obviously that kind of clouded my judgment a little bit with wanting to keep or sell the guitar. And so the fact that I
Right.
got it up and working again, I mean, it felt at the time that was the right thing to do. But looking back on it, I probably should have done is just kept it,
Stuck it
just
out.
sat on it,
Yeah.
sat on it for a while. And I probably would have kept it around.
Yeah.
Really, just because, I mean, despite the reasons, and there's plenty of them, of why you probably shouldn't own a Parker.
Right.
it's at the same time,
There's a couple of
it's like
reasons
if-
not to like one, you know?
yeah, but at the same time, if the stars have aligned where you have one that checks all of the boxes, there's a reason why, if you get the right one, that after, like that one I had, I mean, if it wasn't for the bridge giving me issues, the guitar otherwise was perfect.
Yeah.
And it had largely not been touched for almost 23 years.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's why Parker has such a cult following. Like the Parker folks, you'd rarely find somebody with one Parker guitar, you know? I mean, they definitely exist, but like usually, you know, the people who are turning some over online that I messaged anyway when I was looking for mine, they're like, yeah, you know, I got 2 Parkers, I got 2 or 3, I've collected a few over the years. You know, it's a bunch of real enthusiasts about the brand, because I think,
Yeah.
you know, once you kind of fit in with one, it's a really cool guitar, and definitely one that I think a lot of people should give a, you know, a lot of people should try them, but you know, as with anything, they're obviously not going to be for everybody. Like the shape can be really
Yeah.
wacky. Like, you know, if you don't jive with the aesthetic of the guitar, I definitely believe that you're gonna be a little biased against it. You know, it is what it is.
You know, that's one thing that I've never, I mean, obviously we're talking about something that's so subjective in the first place, but that is actually one thing that have never understood, is why people say that is not a good looking guitar.
I think it looks great.
I know people have commented on the way the horn was designed,
Mm-hmm.
but I want to tell you something. It's not until you have one and
Mhm.
play it when you realized why it was designed the way it is. I don't know about you. I mean, I know it sounds like I'm a Parker fanboy over here. I mean, I kind of.
I think we are. I think we can say that we are very comfortably. You know.
Unapologetically, but at the same time, that again, I don't know how you feel about yours, but like when I picked up the Parker and played it, it's balanced perfectly.
Perfectly.
I mean, there's been very few guitars that I've played that have been that comfortable
Yeah.
of a guitar.
Yeah, no, totally. I was struck by the same exact thing when I pulled mine out of the case. You know, it shipped in tune, which was amazing, you know, for a guitar that's getting to be, you know,
same with mine.
20 something years old. And when I pulled it out and sat it on my lap, it was one of those unique moments where it wasn't so much like playing a guitar and you're like, cause you know, if you try to balance a Stratocaster on your lap, they can kind of dive backwards or forwards. You know, SGs have terrible neck dive if you try to play one sitting in your lap, you know, just because they're so lightweight with the heavy headstocks. But the Parker guitar was awesome because it was less like having a guitar sitting in your lap and more like the feeling of if you give somebody a hug. You know, it was like hugging the guitar.
Oh, 100%.
In the fact that, like, you know, it sort of fit just right. Like, it wasn't moving. You didn't have to slide it around. You could just get on with playing it. You know, you didn't have to kind of keep one finger on the fingerboard, you know, kind of holding it sort of more or less where it needs to be. You know, it's a very, very, very well balanced guitar.
Yeah, I mean, just the profile of it, how thin and light it was. I think I know that we've talked about this before too. It's just like that. I guess if anybody is wanting to know an equivalent guitar that would play similarly, I would say like neck wise, a PRS.
Yeah. They had a very comfortable, like a C kind of neck profile. Some of them were a little
Yep.
bit thicker, some of them were a little bit thinner, but generally speaking, they had a really comfy neck. And it reminds me a lot of the PRS that you have. That it's a really kind of middle of the road, really comfy C-shaped neck.
Yep.
That I think almost everybody could at least get along with, if not really like.
Yeah.
Maybe not the big 52, Blackguard neck fellas.
Right.
It's a little smaller than that.
Right. But yeah, I mean, it's just, I mean, Parker guitars are fun to talk about just because, I mean, I think like what we had talked about a while ago is that it's a shame in a way that, I mean, obviously that those Parker models were just way ahead of their time at the time. I mean,
think,
the first guitar that had stainless frets. I mean,
right.
And it seemed like, I mean, I don't know how dumb this sounds, I guess, but it seemed like Ken Parker was almost 20 years too early.
Yeah.
That, I mean, considering the guitars that you're seeing nowadays, that people are not only willing to buy, but just makers, what's a good way to put it? I guess like more boutique, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's really the right word, but
with kind of some of the wackier shapes too. You've got like the headless Kiesels, the Strandbergs, you've got the Aristides guitars that are all, man-made materials. You've got, I mean, any number of wacky, alternative looking guitars. I agree with you. I think Ken's problem was he was too big a visionary and went in 1993. I mean, of course, then again, he was building a $10,000 guitar for $3,000 back in '93. I think currently he builds a $30,000 guitar for $30,000.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that scales, right?
Right. We recompensate.
The modular,
so it's
the modular jazz guitar that he makes, which is that thing is pretty rad.
It's stupid cool.
But it's, I don't know. I mean, there was definitely a lot of innovative things on those guitars that, I mean, it was truly greater than the sum of its parts. I mean, it's just, it's one of those guitars that it's just, I mean, you can sort of, I obviously appreciate the craftsmanship in the components, but when you're looking at it, when you look at them all in total, in the guitar, I mean, it was just, yeah, I mean, just such a nicely made guitar, with the caveat, if you can find one that has been taken care of.
Yeah. And, thankfully, even in the day, like, $3,000 was a lot of money. So I think most people most people who picked one up, most people who have them now, like, generally speaking, it's hard to find lemons out there. They really were built to withstand the test of time, but that's not to say they're not out there. I mean, if you do go out looking for one, like, there's definitely a couple of things to look out for. Like, the frets that can delaminate is a definite concern. That seems to be the most widespread complaint of the complaints, but it's definitely one of them. I mean, it's not a Parker problem. Like, it's not unique to Parker, but, any electrical components over time can, start to kind of sound buzzy or fuzzy. And, you might need to look into getting those replaced, which if it's, the flex cable kind of ones, that could be a little bit easier said than done, depending on the,
yeah, exactly.
Some of the PCBs themselves, you can have like gremlins in the electronics, the truss rod, you got to watch out for that. Cause like you said, if you pop that thing, that's the end of the road for the truss rod. You got to be careful adjusting it. That's right. But
I mean, I think I think if I were to approach Parker guitars again, I would probably stick with the Nitefly, just
Yeah.
because of I do prefer that simpler design in that
Yeah.
model
It's more,
versus the other models where they had like the leaf springs. You know, you had to
right.
have the right. You know, if you wanted to change your strings, then you had to get the right leaf spring
Right.
to compensate for the string gauge. And it's like I thought
Right.
to myself, my
Good luck
brain had a
finding
hard
that.
enough my brain had a hard enough time with
The
with
traditionally inspired
with the
one.
traditional
Yeah.
one. It's just like my brain would just probably explode.
Absolutely.
Ended up on
Absolutely.
something else.
You know? But yeah, I mean, I
But
think all of that set aside, like if you are new to Parker, if you're somebody who hasn't tried Parker, they're definitely not only do they merit taking a look at one, but I really think that like it's an easy guitar to love once you put your hands on one and you can kind of click with a lot of the design
yeah,
philosophies behind it. I mean, Ken Parker wanted a really, really lightweight resonant guitar. The Nitefly is definitely more traditionally inspired. It has like kind of thicker, I think they're ash bodies with like, some of the other signature Parker components, like, the carbon fiber and the stainless steel frets and whatnot. But
yep,
the original Flies, I mean, those are some of the most lightweight resonant guitars. Like if you can, I mean, not everyone's a gem, but almost all of them are really, really good. So, if you can put your hands on one, like they really do
yeah,
sound great. They feel great. They're comfortable to play.
yep.
And I think if you can get past the aesthetics, if that's what's turning you off, there's not really a lot you can do. But
Yeah, I guess that's a hard one to. I mean, obviously, you can't force yourself to like something. I guess that you don't like the looks of,
that's right.
but it's just you know, whatever floats your boat, I guess. But to me, it is a great design. I mean, there's nothing else that looks like them.
Yeah. Yeah, they're beautiful guitars. I really do think so. Hopefully there will be a time when Parker makes kind of a resurgence. Like I know that, Larry Fishman, I think, bought the trademark back in 2021, something like that, because he was an original partner with Ken Parker. I think
Yeah.
he was one of the partners in the original
Yep.
business. So it's not impossible, I guess, that it's definitely a shelf brand as of right now. I do think that like, today's market would be a little bit more embracing of it than in the early 90s. It was kind of a little bit of a different time, but
Oh yeah. I mean, like we were saying earlier, that the kind of guitars that the guitar community is willing to buy now,
oh yeah.
that it's just it seems, to your point, that obviously, again, I'm biased a little bit, but I could see that I could see that guitar potentially having some success again. I mean, if
Yeah.
somebody wanted to really, uh, you know, I mean, obviously Parker Guitars is Ken Parker, so I mean, it wouldn't be quite the same, I guess, if there wasn't some involvement from him or,
I'd love to see that. Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, if if the original group could get back, reunion tour would
Bring
be
the
great.
band back. That's right. And I think even still, to that point, it's not that there always haven't been people who have been willing to pay really high premiums for instruments, but you have to think that there's definitely a lot of people out there who would probably pay $10,000 for that guitar. I mean, obviously 10 grand is a crazy amount of money, but you also don't need like a giant, production scale necessarily if you're going into that boutique market. So I don't know. It would be a really, really nice thing to see Parker guitars back on the market, even at, heinous price points, just to be able to, have
Yeah.
the opportunity to get some of the cooler. Cause like I said, I'm really into the Emerald Fly, and boy, that's just
That's a nice
one of the
color.
more collectible ones. People know what they want for those, which is unfortunate, because that's definitely the one I would have rather bought over the Nitefly. But being a
Yeah.
Strat guy, the Nitefly was a pretty safe bet, and I do really like mine. Like I don't know that I wouldn't sell it, but I'm not in a hurry to.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's, yeah. Again, looking back on it, I probably should have sat on mine for a little bit once it kind of let myself cool off a little bit after the kind of the fiasco of getting to the point of understanding how all of that is supposed to work. But like I said, I mean, that's the beauty of them, just because they don't have a huge following, that they can still be found at decent prices still. So
and reasonable prices. And, I think the features for me are the thing that still merits considering. Because I mean, if you look at the features of a Parker guitar, stack them aside any other, really nice high end, not necessarily like shreddy guitar, but look what they're offering. You got stainless steel frets, you got carbon fiber reinforcement, you got the exoskeleton, of course. You've got some quirky parts on there, but you definitely have like, the piezoacoustic, electric system. I think that is pretty widespread in the Ernie Ball Majesty guitars. John Petrucci, I know, really likes that setup.
Yeah.
And, there's definitely others. I think it was just like you said, it was just a little too ahead of its time. And you hate to say they were charging too little for them, but even full price, that guitar was a deal,
Totally. It was just, yeah, I don't think something that you see much, you see much of these days, something that's taken an already well-established style and kind of innovating on that. That hasn't been a lot of those around.
I think so. It's the kind of thing where, yeah, it's definitely a guitar that kind of pushed the envelope. And I mean, even now, that's not necessarily like a mainstream thing to do, to your point. Like, you definitely, I think there are people that are innovating on classic designs pretty interestingly.
Yeah,
that's definitely out there. But at the same time, like, I think Parker was kind of one of the original out there guitars, before there was like, the weird Abasi guitars, before there was the Strandbergs, before there was the,
yeah, I agree.
All those funky, kind of guitars out there. You had Parker that kind of was super out of place in the music catalog next to, the Les Paul reissues and the Fender custom shops and everything else that you could track down back in the old days,
Yeah.
And it wasn't, I don't think it was quite as hated as the Gibson Robot Les Paul. But
no, I don't think there were many that were able to match the.
I don't know that the
burning at the stake
about that. Right, the people really hated the Robot Les Paul.
They did not like that at all.
They did not like that at all. But the Parker, I mean, it's even today a guitar that's getting to be 20, 30 years old. You can pick it up out of a gig bag after 5-10 people have owned it before, maybe in some cases, and it still plays and feels like a new, modern, and exciting guitar. And
yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of a classic in that way, that it doesn't look out of place with in the market today, and knowing that it still holds its own in more ways than one against a lot of things that are more modern.
Absolutely. Like, if you saw it on a website today in 2023, it wouldn't look out of place. So I think that in and of itself is enough of a testament to really make it a worthwhile guitar to consider. Especially because, like you said before, secondhand, I mean, come on, it's a steal.
It is a steal.
An import, Schecter guitar, which is a phenomenal instrument, is in some cases more expensive than a USA made, guitar with a carbon fiber exoskeleton, stainless steel frets, custom.
Oh man, I mean, it's like when you're, it's like that even makes it even more obvious is when you're looking at it with respect to just what import guitars are these days. Like, Epiphone is charging $1,400 for some import guitars.
I know, it's crazy.
My Parker was cheaper.
Absolutely,
which is kind of funny, but no, I think to kind of wrap things up, I guess, with respect to just Parker guitars, is that I think, like anything, any vintage guitar, regardless whether it's Parker or anybody else, is that there's going to be those disadvantages that just comes with that. That's just the nature of vintage guitars.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, if anybody is interested in purchasing one, I would keep some of those caveats in mind. especially the bridge adjustment, which is
What set you back?
is what set me back. And personally, I think something that's actually not often talked about with respect to Parker
Sure.
guitars.
Sure.
There's a little bit that can go wrong there that's not necessarily intuitive.
Mm-hmm.
And, in addition to that, is just some of the other issues that people have encountered over the years, which I think, to your point earlier, I don't think is something that you're going to encounter a whole lot of, but it's just something to keep in mind if you are looking.
Right.
But on the flip side of that, I mean, it's, again, like what you were saying, that there's a lot of reasons to own one.
Yep.
I mean, if you can, if any of the ones that you found have kind of checked that list off of it's in good shape, there's nothing wrong with the bridge, frets are good,
Reasonable deal.
carbon fiber is still in good shape, and it's a reasonable deal, they're unbeatable.
Go for it. You
I would buy
definitely
one.
should try one out.
Again. But so yeah, I mean, like, again, reiterate, if you're thinking of buying one and you've got all your bases covered, you're not gonna find a more interesting guitar for the money.
I mean, talk about it. How many how many people who have sworn off a brand are sitting here recommending you try one out? How often does that happen?
Exactly.
So yeah. Well, thanks for listening to episode 2 of the Tonewood podcast about Parker guitars. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as we enjoyed having it. It's definitely still a cool topic, still a cool guitar, and still one that I think is maybe even a little misunderstood to this day. So, like we said, get out there, try one for yourself. Let us know what you think. Thanks for giving us a listen. We appreciate your hopefully continued support as we grow and mature with the Tonewood podcast. And we'll see you all next time. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.